So I think that was enough intro for me, other than the fact that I am one of the Seattleites speaking today. And by my count, Seattle's ruling today. We have a majority here. I am the last surviving founder of the Seattle Ruby Brigade, which is the oldest Ruby group in the world. First and oldest. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for sticking it out through the entire day. This is a fantastic conference. Thank you, Kobe, and everyone else for organizing it. Let's get started. So I like to set expectations, keeps people adjusted correctly, except that this is my first keynote, and I didn't really know what that meant, so I talked to Aaron about it, and basically we came up that it was fluffy feel-good stuff. What that means, I don't entirely know. I've got 170 slides and an unbounded time limit, so who knows how many slides per minute that is. So I'm last and you're stuck with me, and fucking deal with it. So I'll just get this out here. When it comes to talking about myself, and how many people have seen one of my talks before? Was it a fluffy feel-good talk? No, it was, shut up. It was probably a very technical talk. When it comes to talking about myself, I hate it. And when I say I hate it, I mean no, really. I hate it. Unfortunately, I was watching a TV show called Mind of a Chef a lot when this came up, and I came up with the quippy title before I realized the implications that I would be talking about myself. So I'm kind of stuck with it. I still hate it, though. So, food. I love food. And almost more than I love food, I love to cook. Between my mom, who is a fantastic cook and one of the best I know, hands down, between that and, why does that slide always take an extra second to load? Starting my formative years in Louisiana, I've been surrounded by good cooking and good cuisine my entire life. So you could say I love cooking. Pretty, pretty pictures. Those are all mine. So no credits given. So food. Okay. Once in a rare while, I cook something damn good. This was so good that I actually had cognitive dissonance eating it. I had a hard time convincing myself that I was the one who was just downstairs cooking it, and I was putting it in my mouth and going, what the fuck happened between here and there, because this is not my dish. And I actually made it, and it made me feel a bit like this guy. Unfortunately, cooking is not genetic, and far more often I feel like this guy. But an increasing amount of time, I'm somewhere in the middle. And true to the anteater picture, I have to include something out of left field. This is my anteater. I love this slide so much that I couldn't not put it in, even though it has no meaning here whatsoever. So like most cooks, I love my knives. I love my tools. Pro tip, the sharper your knives, the less they hurt. And this can have negative consequences because you wind up bleeding into your food before you realize you're bleeding. But it does help on the hurt part. And it actually stems the bleeding quite a bit. You delay the bleeding for quite some time until it works its way out. Unlike a lot of cooks, I don't love recipe books. They tell you the whats and not the whys. There's no creativity in them. And while the end result may taste great, it is not why I cook. Instead, I love technique books. I like to know how at a higher level. I like to know what's going on in the cooking itself. And some books that really exemplify this are On Food and Cooking and Keys to Good Cooking by Harold McGee, who is also periodically on Mind of a Chef, at the very least season 2. And Think Like a Chef by Tom Colocchio. One of the things he taught me that I really liked was to turn down the heat, if you have gas, until you can hear the food, and then use your ears to cook. And then Cookwise by Sherry Corer, who is quite often on Good Eats. Just look at this woman. Who doesn't want a spiky-haired grandma with a southern lilt who knows chemistry and can make really good food? She's delightful, and she can teach you things like the science of asparagus pea. I love that. I actually, truly, for years wanted to adopt her as my grandma. So I also love cooking shows, specifically technique shows. And originally that was really about Good Eats. The first episode I saw was on artichokes, and one of the things he did was to get an even cook, make sure that they were submerged at all times, is he put them in a nice big pot, filled it up with enough water, but the little bastards float. So he took one of the UFO steamers, you know what we're talking about? She knows what I'm talking about, and put it upside down on top of the artichokes, and then put a rock on top of that. Here's a rock for cooking. Here's a cooking rock. And this blew my mind. There are things like cooking rocks. And now I have cooking rocks, and I refer to them to other people, and they go, cooking rock? But yeah, cooking rock. And then obviously I love the show The Mind of a Chef. So much so that I'd rather have this as my title page. But I do text for my title pages, so this is just in the middle. So, a little bit about the path that I have walked. This is also painful. What makes me tick? Well, whether they're electronic, mechanical, or made of meat, I love understanding, and I love pushing buttons. Quick, painful history, painful as it may be. This gives the highlights of the path that I've walked down. I was born in 1972. Computers weren't exactly on everyone's radar at the time. I'm going to go really quick through this. Did some stuff where I started using computers. Around the 6th grade, I picked up my first computer, and I also picked up my first language, which Lido was Logo, and then moved into heavy hit and basic, both line number mode and non-line number mode. Junior high, I did some more stuff. High school, I got into APCS Pascal, or computer science in Pascal. Started branching out into C. I knew there was this thing called object orientation that was starting to get talked about, but I also knew that I was completely ignorant on it. And unlike today, there was no internet to go on and go figure out these things. So you had to rely on these paper things. And at the time, they sucked. Not in general, but the ones for OO. College was really my information sponge years. That's when I picked up Smalltalk and really had my object-oriented epiphany, as I call it. And I picked up, I don't know, 10 to 20, if not more, programming languages because I was picking up everything I could at the time. And then professionally, actually went on to go work at Gemstone right out of school. They're the ones that do maglev. So I was working on object-oriented databases. I was working on implementations of Smalltalk, implementations of Java, one of the original licensees at the time. Went on to move to Amazon, which is when, not where, when I picked up Ruby, and the rest is downhill. And by the way, oh, this is not doing fast. Yeah, I worked at big companies and small companies. I'm now an independent consultant in Seattle, and I'm available. So if you want and have any gigs, grab me afterwards. So what is a hacker to me? I think that's exemplified by a book by Stephen Levy called Hackers. It really details the start of the hacker mindset that really started at MIT in the Model Train Club. Some notable quotes. I'm not going to actually, when I have big quotes, I hate lots of words on slides. I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. They're almost always going to have little red sections. I'm going to focus on that because that's the important part. The rest of the words, filler. I'll publish the slides. Leave me alone. So When you grow up with the insatiable curiosity as how things work, the delight you find upon discovering something as elegant as circuit logic is profoundly thrilling. That is the only time I'm going to read the whole slide. Blah, 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 blah. The wild pleasure taken in mere involvement is called a hack. And for me, insatiable curiosity resonates to my core. It's really what I find to be the difference for me between a hacker and a 9-to-5 day job programmer. But for me, the emphasis is really on making. I want to understand, but I need to make. It's the reason why Kobe had the burden of going through the intellectual property exclusion list, where I am now down to 8-point font to get it on one page. I was raised surrounded by artists. My mother can't not paint. My father can't not photograph. My brother can't not draw. And apparently I can't not code. And some of you may have actually read some of my code, so you know that it's not exactly art, but it is one of my main creative outlets. In the same vein, what isn't a hacker? Although there's some overlap with these groups, and some of that's a form of self-selection, I am not talking about crackers. I'm not talking about script kiddies. I'm not talking about legal or illegal black hats. And I am certainly not talking about anything that comes from the mainstream media, because it's not like we hang out with Angelina Jolie or anything. Does anyone know this movie? Anyone? Oh, that's terrible. Okay, so, I mean, even this poster is amazingly hideous on so many levels. Just the tagline. Their only crime was curiosity. How about signing on to such a horrible movie? That's the real crime. It was really bad, and if you haven't seen it, fuck it. Spend 2 hours and watch it and join in the misery with the rest of us. I saw that in the theater. That was awful. So why aren't you going when I say go? What type of stuff really turns me on? What am I most interested in? Well, of course, long walks on the beach, but also cranes that put up cranes. These are amazing. I love these things, and I become I don't know, what, 6-year-old boy whenever one of these goes by. These things drive themselves along. They put out their little legs and level themselves, and then another truck comes up, and they got all these weights, and they grab their own weights and put them on themselves until they're nice and stable, and then they put up another crane that puts up the building. I could care less about the building, and quite frankly, I could actually care less about the secondary crane. It's the first crane I really love. And then it unpacks itself and puts its little legs down and drives off. It's fucking amazing. So I also love, surprise, machines that make machines. And I love implementing a language defined in itself and then getting it to run. And all of this is called bootstrapping, and that's in the mathematical or computer science sense of the word, not the business sense of the word, which I actually might not need to explain since we're not in San Francisco. That's the speaker, okay. I love meta tools. I love being a developer's developer, and I love thinking about thinking, which is kind of like being a developer's developer, but about the meatware. So let's think about learning for a second. There's this concept called shuhari. It describes the stages of learning in Japanese martial arts. But for me, it's just a little bit too woo. There's a more formalized model called the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. And it is a bit complex. Basically, you have varying levels of progression through a skill. And it starts from, actually, I don't think that they have. Mike explained this to me originally, and he said there was a level 0 where you didn't know what you didn't know, but I don't think they start there. But basically, you go from complete novice to complete expert, and this maps the progression throughout that and where, what the symptoms are of that progression. But like I said, this is a little more complex than I like. Instead, I actually prefer the 4 stages of competence because it maps to a 2x2 table. And I am slightly addicted to mapping things to 2 or 3 dimensions to understand things. But there is a linear progression through this. So you start at unconscious incompetence, which means you don't know what you don't know. That would be a level 0 on Dreyfus. And you move to conscious incompetence, which means you're aware of what you don't know, but you're not good at it yet. And then you start to get good at it, but it takes work. And then it's effortless once you are unconsciously competent at something. And now this, still a few more words than I like on a slide. So maybe we can make it a little more black and white and simply say that there's wrong and right and intuition versus analysis. And then it maps through the same way. And I really like this. I think this is really easy to explain. It's really easy to map your own skill sets to, and you can use it as a tool. So how do we use this tool? Well, first off, you use it to consciously level up, either yourself or one of your underlings or someone you're teaching, whatever. And one of the things I really like about this, the concept of mapping skill level at all, is that it's at any level of granularity you want. So whether it's your ability in a particular language, or your text editor, or your shell, or your career, or whatever programming paradigm you're starting to work in, it doesn't matter. This can apply at every level of those things. So as a slightly more concrete example, this is me in a 2x2 table. I, for the sake of honesty, don't know a damn thing about R, even though I've tried 3 times. I know it exists, and that's about it, but really, truly, I can't write a line of it. And I know, let's call it 5% of Mathematica. Mathematica is huge. There's a lot there. And I'm not even talking about math being huge. Math is definitely huge, and Mathematica covers all of that, and then covers chemistry and covers physics and everything else. Oh my God, everything else. So I know 5% of Mathematica, and it's a lot of work for me to use, but really, I'm incompetent at it, and that's okay. And when it comes to Scheme, or more specifically Racket, I am competent at it. I've actually released a package in Racket now, and I'm conscious about it, obviously. But you know, it's work for me. And when it comes to Ruby, I can get my way around in it. So what you want to do is you want to figure out where you are in either of those 2 models. And one provides more levels and therefore more granularity in it, and it provides a lot more description. So it's actually kind of easier to use in some ways. And then you want to prioritize which ones are important to you, and work on a plan of attack on how you're going to level yourself up or level your underlings up or whatever in a way that makes sense for your priorities. So how I think about hacking. When I first did this talk and I finally slapped them into slides, I wound up with somewhere in the range of 250 slides, not knowing how much time I had and not knowing the pace I wanted to do, because this is a fluffy talk, so I can't actually do my usual like machine gun version of my talk. So I'm going to give you my top 6. I prioritized them, and depending on time, I might have a few more. Unfortunately, my balloon's a little deflated, but that's fine. By far my most favorite quote to drive me is Real Artist Ship. I have, I don't know, 90 some odd gems under my belt in one Racket package. And 2 or 3 Perl ones, although who fucking knows where those are. And this just really, like, this to my core is what I want to do. I'm pushing into, I'm working on getting into my 1000th gem release in the next year or 2. I like the ship. That's really what I get down to, is I want to make sure that my stuff gets out there as quick as possible so that you guys can benefit from it. And in my mind, the thing that really exemplifies this more than anything else is the Cult of Done Manifesto. Has anyone heard of it? 2 of us. Woo! And she may have learned it on the plane down. Normally, I'm allergic to anything with the word manifesto in it, but in this case, it's pretty innocuous. So here it is. That's the whole thing. I'm not expecting you to be able to read this whole thing in the time I'm going to give you, and I'm not expecting you to understand this yet. I mostly want you to be aware of it. But this is the whole manifesto. It includes the poster that you can actually find and buy online, and I'm actually thinking about putting that up on my desk. And my favorites are in red and especially in green. And no, I'm not going to read it because my eyes are going. Second, and I have this on all of my desktops to remind me at all times, Simple Design Intense Content by Edward Tufte. I think that is absolutely perfect, and it is definitely the way I try to make my software come out. And it reminds me to simplify. To keep things pared back to their bare essence, I find that by heeding this advice, you'll wind up with something that's much more flexible and useful than you ever anticipated and that you ever designed for. Third, and directly related to that beauty, this is from Extreme Programming, so this is Ward Cunningham. There's a lot of overlap in these talks today, so I'm expecting all of you to understand and synthesize everything from today. And for me, this is also known as pragmatism. I use this every time I write a line of code. And it's exemplified by a number of my favorite quotes. I'm not even going to, that just makes me speechless. I love this. It's beyond clear. It says exactly what it needs to say. In fact, it says a little bit more, but then it corrects it. Of two competing theories or explanations, all other things being equal, the simpler one is preferred. Occam's razor. Use that whenever you write your code. Write a second version, compare the two, keep the simpler one. And I was very tempted to start with this slide and then add my closing slide right behind it and say that in infinite wisdom, I have boiled it down to just this slide and we're done. Thank you. But no, that would be a very short talk. But absolutely removing things from your code, removing things from your design, removing things from your product actually makes it better and more maintainable and more shippable and more everything. And Minitest feels like this for me. I'm finally happy with Minitest 5 because there's nothing more that I can remove from it and still have it be Minitest. Which is unfortunate because I have no idea what the plan for Minitest 6. I don't know. I have no idea. Albert Einstein's famous quote, "Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler." This is both encouragement, but it's also a warning not to make things simpler than they should be, because minimalism can be a double-edged sword. Ward Cunningham also said, and this is part of his write-ups on do the simplest thing that possibly work, simple designs often come after the project has been running for a while. And you'll notice when you work on a greenfield project, you'll build it and build it and build it and build it. In 2.0, you remove and you remove and you remove, and it actually gets more to the essence of the thing. In other words, let's focus on the goal. The goal right now, and they mean right now, is to make this routine do this thing. And you should have that type of focus every time you're coding. And the mere act of writing it organized our thoughts. Staying pragmatic and focused on getting concrete quickly keeps our code honest and aligned with our thinking, or realigns our thinking. This is why we do many small spikes as experiments. It makes us get concrete. It makes us figure out whether our idea is right or not. And if it's not, we can throw it away for a small cost. Or we can throw it away and rebuild the real thing, because we always throw away our spikes, right? Right? We do not ship our spikes. Variables in a formula. The simpler the better. I think of a lot of systems, a lot of software, a lot of hardware, a lot of meatware as variables in a formula. The more unknowns you have, the more fluctuations and the more chaos you have in your system. So the removal of variables is key. This is about as good as it gets. This is maximal signal, minimal noise. And for just a little bit more complexity, you can pretty much describe the whole known universe. This is a subset that's described in Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism. And for a really dorky example, my uniform. I have better things to do than think about what I'm wearing. So I pick my clothes based entirely on the temperature outside. And otherwise, I wear and buy the exact same things. And before you laugh, before you laugh, can anyone guess what this is? Oh, did I hear it? What would Sandy Metz what? Wear. That's right. Team Black Shirts unite. So if it's good enough for Sandy, it's good enough for me. And related to do the simplest things that could possibly work is Yagni, or you ain't gonna need it. One of the things that drives me nuts when I'm working with other people is when you wind up pairing with that guy, the what if guy, the guy whose needless concerns for every edge case that you're not going to come across drives all forward progress into the ground. This is the thing that you need to dig your heels in on and repeat until they get it. And there's this guy named Dr. Paul McCready. Does anyone know the name? No? Awesome. Yes? PhD in physics. That's the only reason why he knows this. Treat every problem as if it can be solved with ridiculous simplicity. The time you save on 98% of the problems for which it's true give you ridiculous resources to apply to the other 2%. This relates directly to the Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your time is spent on 20% of the system, and you can change those numbers as you see fit. He used 98 and 2. This idea is a much, much better way to write your software. Stop writing all your arg checks. Stop doing all that stuff. Write what you need, get it to work, move on, and when you come up to the actual complex stuff, the business logic, you can spend your time there. This is McCready's Gossamer Albatross, and it's the first human-powered vehicle to fly across the English Channel. And it is not missing part of its wing. That's just some weird artifact from Wikipedia. But the thing is incredibly light, and it's incredibly efficient, and it's incredibly simple. And one of the reasons why it is that way is because he adhered to that rule the entire time through the design and manufacturing process. Fourth, be objective in your endeavors whenever humanly possible. Measure, 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 measure. Measure twice, cut once. I can't find a real attribution for this quote, so either it comes from this old house or the ancient Romans. I don't know. Tomato, tomato. But basically, you can't objectively improve without objective numbers. Try to tie everything back to repeatable numbers, even if they're only relative to each other. And an example I have of that is my tool. It's a complexity metrics tool for analyzing your source code called Flog. And the numbers absolutely are meaningless. They are meant to be compared against each other over time and used to compare the complexity of your code, growth, or refactoring efforts, or whatever. But you can't just take the number for this Rails app and compare it to the number for that Rails app and go, oh, this one's better because the number's better, because that means nothing. And very importantly, benchmark, then optimize. Humans, the meatware in the room, even as experienced as I may be, we're terrible at knowing the cost of code. We're terrible at knowing where the cost of the code is. Those gut feelings that you have, oh, we need to cache that, they're all far too often wrong. So just measure it. It's not hard. We actually have a lot of really good tools in Ruby to measure stuff. But don't just measure your code. Measure you. Measure your team. Measure your product, whether that's in sales or complexity or whatever. Measure your company. It doesn't really matter what level you want to measure at. If you can get something to get you objective numbers, do it. So Aaron got started on Rails because Active Record was slow and had a really crufty, bad design. And he got in there and started digging around and working on it, and it's still pretty crufty, but at least it's not as slow. And then he went to go work on Arrow, part of, well, a dependency of Active Record, because it was incredibly excessive in what it wanted to be. It wanted to be a relational calculus engine, yada, 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 and he wanted something to generate SQL. So now it generates SQL. Fifth, quickest feedback loop wins, also known as fail fast, also known as prototyping or spikes, also known as short iteration cycles, continuous deployment, whatever you can. As much as possible, work your process to have as tight of a feedback loop as possible. That's partly why we pair. It's partly why we write tests. It's partly why we have those CIs, because some of you are too lazy to run your tests. I use a tool called Minitest-Autotest that runs a targeted subset of my tests every time I save a file. It's the tightest feedback loop that I can get, and I live by it. And finally, perhaps most importantly, I'm actually doing pretty damn good on time, so I might be able to get some of these extras in. Scratch that itch. I've said before in my hurting code for fun and profit talk, you should have feelings about your code, so either love it or hate it, or better, love to hate the bad code. Without the feelings and without an insatiable curiosity, you're just a day job programmer. And you're going to burn out, and I don't know, go work at a Quickie Mart. Aaron, more than anyone else I know, exemplifies scratch that itch. He started Nokogiri because Apricot was dying on the vine, and it wasn't doing what web browsers actually do when you get malformed content. And surprise, a lot of HTML out there is malformed. And that meant that Apricot's search results weren't conformant to the behavior that you were expecting, so you really shouldn't have been using it to test. And I do mention graphics. I made the graphics gem because Gosu, which is a game engine, and RubySDL, which is just a Ruby wrapper around libSDL, they're both really oriented towards game programming. Has anyone done game programming? The y-axis is upside down for some fucking reason. And it means that trig's wonky, your math is wonky, you have to do all this extra work, and it drives me nuts because it means I can't go to these things to get someone who has zero or roughly zero experience programming and get them to visualize something tangibly quickly, because I have to explain a whole new math to them that they didn't learn in junior high, and that's ridiculous. So the graphics gem is a visualization and simulation framework that has quadrant 1 math, and trig works, and you don't have to explain anything. You say it's just junior high math, and it works. And it's got a really clean API so that noobs don't have to learn too much Ruby to really get into this and to visualize whatever it is they're thinking about. And Vlad was created because of my frustration with Capistrano and NetSSH being huge, complicated, and buggy on certain platforms. So I got together 6 thug programmers with 6 dozen cookies, because thug programmers like cookies, and got a plan and got something out the door that worked just using SSH and rsync and not having such complexity, and it worked much better. Now, health and numbers. After we did those 6 examples, back to food. I don't want to be that guy, so I'm not going to go into details, but I collect a ton of numbers about my physical being. I've got about 10 years worth of data, and I use exponential averaging to look at the trends in those numbers, so I don't freak out on an individual day when I'm bloated or dehydrated or whatever. You have a lot of fluctuation in day-to-day numbers, and that's because humans are complex biological blobs of meat. So looking at trends really helps. So last year, exactly around this time, things dramatically changed in my trending for the worse, and I freaked out. So I did some research and came up with a possible diagnosis. I did a lot more research to follow that up, and I decided which variable that I wanted to tweak, and I experimented on myself, and the results were, suffice to say, drastic. Subsequent visits to an actual doctor because I don't recommend just doing this in a vacuum. And actual lab work, where they take your blood and like give you like sciencey numbers, confirmed that my original diagnosis was correct and it validated my approach to solving it. Part of the reason why I experimented on myself without the doctors was I was recently unemployed and I just didn't want to deal with the insurance shit yet. And yeah, but I had the numbers, I had a lot of science, it worked out. My freak out was justified, and without that data and without the scientific approach and that hacker mindset to just change one variable, I wouldn't have solved this, and I'd be in trouble today. And again, I'm not going to go into details. I'm not going to be that guy. There's no such thing as a panacea for health. But I'm happy to talk to anyone who's curious about it, either here later or offline. But remember, be a hacker and hack everything, because it just makes things cleaner and simpler and more easy to maintain. Thank you. I did have something else that was relevant. I don't know what they did with, God, fonts. You'd think that they'd get fonts right. Really quickly, how you know Ryan was made for object orientation. That was me trying to learn clockwise versus counterclockwise, and I didn't know whether the teacher was talking about if I was the clock or if I was looking at the clock. So yeah, so I actually really like the approach described earlier with regard to using anthropomorphization when you design your objects and getting into the mindset of what that object is and its responsibilities and how it interacts with other objects. And the neat thing is, like, as you're interacting with those other objects, you get to anthropomorphize the other side as well and get that interaction really figured out. And if you're thinking as them, that makes it a lot easier. It also makes it so that it's a lot easier to justify not shoving a lot of extra responsibility in, because once you're in the mindset, it doesn't make sense to add all the extra complexity if it doesn't actually belong there. And I don't really want to give any more content. I just thought this one was funny. Because I'm still stuck with that every day. I call it my relativity problem, and yeah, I need to make sure that I'm over here most of the time. So thank you. And I do have plenty of time, so I can take questions if there are any, but this was a fuzzy talk, so I don't know if there's going to be any. Yes? And you're just talking about one project at a time. Well,
That's a good question.
I have two levels of answer for that. So,
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with, the question was, what's my mindset on when I ship and why and yada yada. And there's two levels of that. There's the micro where you're talking about a project, and I say ship it as soon as you commit, but yeah, and it passes the test and it's got the functional requirements and yada yada. But I want to ship as early and often as possible because, well, I guess actually because that's the tightest feedback loop I can get with the users. By getting it out there, I will get the bugs filed, or I will get feedback that it's great, or I'll get feedback that I'm missing some requirements as quickly as possible. And with my open source work, that's done via shipping. One of the things that Aaron complains about a lot working on Rails is that no one uses those betas that they put out because they only get the bugs filed once they release the non-beta version. I mean, there are some crazy people that ship on Edge Rails. I think there's actually a lot fewer of them these days. But they don't seem to file bugs because they do ship bugs in those final releases, and they don't get feedback during the betas. So I just want to put my stuff out there as quickly and expediently as possible. The other question is how do I decide when to ship a product versus focus my time on something else, because I have 90 some odd products. And to follow up with your part about when I abandon a project. I don't abandon projects, and I probably should. What I do is I deprioritize them. And so I've got this ridiculous life cycle model that, God, I've already said enough embarrassing shit about myself today. I use the cicada life cycle model. Does anyone know cicadas? Has anyone lived in the South? Does anyone? So yes. So what happens is they lay eggs or whatever in the ground for a prime number of years in order to spread out how often they're coming out of the ground and therefore not have predation happen at a massive level because they all came out at the same time. So some cicadas last 13 years in the ground, some last 17 years in the ground, and as a result, they're only going to really collide every 13 times 17 years. Otherwise, they're going to stay off cycle pretty well, and the predation will be pretty even. So somehow that applies to software. And I've got 5 levels of priority on my projects right now as it stands. And the level 1s I look at, I triage, I work on and release every single week. The level 2s I do every 2 weeks. The level 3s I do every 3 weeks, 5 and 7. And I could reasonably add another level or 2 to really push off the really low level projects that I just don't bother with anymore. I mean, some of them I kill off because they only run on Ruby 1.8, like parse tree relied on the internals of 1.8, so I had to kill that one. But otherwise, I have a really bad job of letting go. So I use the stupid cicada model because it works for me. Any other questions? Yeah. The question is, well, the assumption is I don't have 90 different itches. And I'm going to have to disagree with that. Okay. Those were all itches at one point in time. Some of them are stupid itches, and like, I don't know, we released, why is that ticking? We released 3 to 5 gems for the stupidest, worst ideas ever talk. Like one of them was the Yoda test framework. We released it as a gem because we could. And it was fully tested, and it was documented, and yada, yada, yada. It was all the stupid whoops metric that we did in the talk to make sure that it was a high-quality, stupid idea. But we had to write it, and therefore I had to release it. Now, it didn't remain an itch because I'd written it. And so some of these are one-offs, some of these are jokes, some of these are sarcastic stabs at other things. But they were all itches. But if they weren't, well, if they weren't, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why I would release something that I didn't actually want for myself, other than because I was paid to, but that wouldn't be under my account, most likely. Yeah?
The comment about fail fast reminds me of an article we read a lot of work about, just code reviews, and get them done. Everybody be able to review the code quickly. It speeds development and feedback stuff.
The sooner you can catch a bug, the cheaper it costs the company overall. But what's the question?
Sorry. Just more the comment. You make me think of everybody being part of that code review process.
Yeah.
How crucial that is.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely crucial. And it's one of the reasons why we pair, right? So we can get a second pair of eyeballs on the code immediately at that time. Hopefully, one of those people is more junior to the other, and there's more knowledge transfer that way. But oftentimes you have pretty equal peers working on something, and just by having those extra eyeballs on it, you hopefully catch the bugs before they even get committed. If not, they get committed to a feature branch or whatever, and then that goes to code review, and then hopefully that gets caught then before it goes to master branch. If not, you have integration level tests and unit level tests in the CI that probably only get run on the CI, and hopefully it doesn't go out the door. But yeah, any and every mechanism you can put in place to tighten the feedback loop and catch a bug earlier makes it cheaper overall for the company, bar none. Ooh, that's a damn good question. Can you make a hacker?
Well, his parents did.
Ta-da! Can you design a hacker? I would like to think so. I would like to think that if that person doesn't naturally have that insatiable curiosity, that you can create that spark. I mean, that's what good teachers want to do anyways, is to create that spark and get people wanting to learn. And that's all this is. It's just wanting to learn and wanting to know how systems work, and how to extend them and how to make them do things they weren't supposed to do. That's what hackers' mentality is really about. So I would like to think so. Do I have a really good recipe for it? No. I would like to. And then I would have an army, and we'd take over the world or something. Yes. Why Ruby? 2 reasons. And they're related. It's the most like small talk, and it's the most like my brain communicates. So I can go from here to text editor with the minimal amount of interface cost. God damn it. And the most like small talk part comes from, I learned small talk in college, and I really cut my teeth on it. And then I went to a small talk vendor, one of 3 at the time, now one of, I want to say 2. And so it's a lot more commercially viable. And one of the things about small talk is that it's pretty exclusionary with the rest of the world. It does a very good job it does an amazing job of being a development environment and object hosting and all that other stuff. It doesn't do such a good job at interfacing with the rest of the world. Being a scripting language and having no VM image and having a bunch of stupid little text files, it's a drawback to small talkers and Lispers, but it's an actual benefit to Rubyists and Unix users and people that work in the corporate environment and so on and so forth. So that sense, it made it really popular really fast. I was at a workshop with Dave Thomas and Andy Hunt in October of 2000 at Oopsla, and they had just released their book, the Pickaxe book, Programming Ruby, and I picked up a copy and it sang to me. It just interfaced with my brain. Okay, thank you very much.